This is the quality of the strap. I just made a small cut. It's right here. This is the first page. The first page has a box. The square measures 5 centimeters. Measure it like this. The error must not exceed 1 millimeter. Exceeding 1 millimeter is unsuitable. Next, let's start with this skirt board. On top of the back seat, this skirt board is easier to make. The bottom and the front share one board. Then the bottom is shorter than the front, 0.2. And after finishing the assembly, then go trim it. Cut off 0.20, 0.2 millimeters, 2 millimeters. It's 0.20. It is bottom. You can cut it after it's assembled. When you're assembling, you can make a mark. This is 1, this is also 1. Then number 2, number 3. Then during the splicing process, attach the serial number to prevent deformation from incorrect splicing during the process. This line is the back center line. When two pieces are joined together, this side overlaps by 0.5. This side is also 0.5. The width here is 1 centimeter. Then you need to think about if you want to change it. If you are sewing on buttons, then sew them on this line. When you're making it, you can check. This width is 0.5 centimeters. Then the width of the Velcro is 1 centimeter or 8 centimeters, 8. Anything that is 0.8 centimeters works. The method for the lining and the face is the same. Then I first cut the lining because the lining is white. This way it's easier to see. Write the information clearly on its pieces. This one is 1 and 1 is stitched together. Then this is 2, this one is 3. Then after the cutting is done, just write it down before it is cut. This way it won't get messy after it's cut. You can cut it first. This is the middle, isn't it? Which piece is in the middle? You can cut one side first, after it's pieced together, then cut the other side. It's best to use white for the lining. And if you use that black one, it's just prone to fading. It will stain the base. I first cut this half, then I'll leave this half for now, to avoid sewing it incorrectly. First, flatten the middle and the sides. The thick sides are weighty. After this side is stitched together, then I'll stitch the other side. This is the lining fully stitched together. And what about the face? The method for the face is identical. The board used is the same too. It's just that the lining, after being sewn together, needs to be shortened slightly. Otherwise, this white part will be visible on the outside. 2 millimeters. After cutting it, this part might come apart. Then you just sew it back together. Secure it a little, sew it up a bit. This lining has been trimmed and then it didn't split. Please help me with it on the phone. Wait for this. The fabric of this skirt's hem, after it has been stitched to the top, then deal with this lining again. The two of them are stitched together first and then prevent it from splitting. The skirt hem is done, put it aside first, then make that. It's the bodice, the upper part. This is a mirror panel. This contains, only here has a tiny seam. The other areas are all mirrored. It needs to be finished painting afterwards. Go sew it together. Then this is its mirror panel. At the bottom is a face. This is the lining. Then draw on the lining. This seam allowance must be marked. Then the position to sew is sew here. Then this is also sewn together. The top is also sewn here. This part isn't sewn here. Then when you press down, first press down on this top line to prevent misalignment. Then press down on both sides. Finally, press down here. What I sewed last is this part. This corner must be properly formed, otherwise it will be hard to piece together when buying that. Once everything is retracted, you can then cut it out. Let me tell you how to cut. This method involves 0.5. You can cut along this line. Then when you are cutting the line here, leave a bit of space. If you retract it completely, just one cut. This line has been cut. Then it can be easily torn apart once stitched because it's just slightly off. It's for hitting the needle. Then it won't get cut. It also won't come undone. Then regarding the seam allowance here, leave it slightly smaller, approximately 0.23. A cutting hole should be made at the corner. Otherwise, it won't be able to flip over. Wait a moment, I'll sit there, I'll go over how to do it again. This part is unsewn. We'll need to flip from here shortly. So just follow this line, just cut it off. And here the thread is secured well. Just leave a bit of seam allowance. Oh wow, it's already so quick. This mark indicates a clamp, the position of the strap. You can draw it this way. The position of this strap is here because it is a mirror panel. So this clamping method is easier. Cut it open like this, then insert the strap and remove it again. I will write the length of this strap on the paper key. I usually sew it directly on after it's finished, sew it directly onto the garment. If it's this type of clip, doesn't it leave no marks? So I do it like this. Yeah, clip it in like this, about 0.5 minutes. Oh, it's clipped in like this, and then look at it like this. As long as it doesn't leak, that's fine. That's probably 0.3. Clamping it down results in 0.3. After this end is secured, then push it in. Clamp it at the marked position on the other side. Here. Then after this is secured, this is also how to reconnect this wire. On this strap, press the sesame strips a little smaller, then press it a little firmer. Otherwise, this strap is too thin. It's easy to break. After this strap is sewn properly, place it on the front. Then have it tried on. Check the length of the strap. Is it just right? Not good. If it's not enough, just adjust it a bit. Then this corner needs to be turned out. This one too. Then fold it like this. After folding, find a midline. The midline is handled like this. Find another midline here, divide this into 3 parts, split it evenly. Then you can fold it along this line, fold it this way, then align it to the center like this. This makes 3 pleats. Then use a needle to pin them in place. That's the bow in the center. After sewing it like this, you can wear it, then fasten it like this. When you see it worn on your body, isn't the strap just perfect? If it's not quite right, then you can turn it over, cut off whatever length it has. This is the front of the skirt panel. Then there's this butterfly stitching area. It's right at this seam here. There's a stitching seam here. And during the sewing process, set aside a little of this 0.5 seam allowance. Sketch it out. This is a 0.5 seam allowance. It fits just right at the corner here, 0.5 centimeter. While stitching here, this point aligns precisely with this seam allowance. Make sure they stay aligned. When you turn it over, this fits perfectly. This seam is aligned with this, aligned with it properly. The seam allowance is this. When sewing here, it needs to be aligned properly. The distance from the edge to the center, there is a 0.5 centimeters gap here. It's a seam allowance. Later, it will need to be joined with yours. This seam allowance needs to be stitched. So it needs to be left out. Okay, fix it here, then measure it up to here. You can secure both ends first, then go ahead and sew it. Make sure to sew it well. If you're skilled, you don't need to pay attention to it. You can just sew it directly. But it's best to leave some allowance here first, otherwise it might not work. You start sewing from here, sew all the way to the end, and then it will be finished. It will simply sew over. This fabric is quite resilient. It will consume part of it. After this top is completed, create a lining fabric, turn it like this, then insert this bust part between the lining and the outer layer. This is the lining. Then sew the back center together. The waist seam is stitched here, then you can flip it over. Once the waist seam is done here, then create the base plate. All right, finish sealing the back center here at the end. First, seal the base plate and the waist. Once the waist seam is done, work on the back center. This line of the back center can be completely sealed. Then regarding the other side, leave an opening here to turn it over. Flip it over, This is the lining. This is an opening I left. Then flip it over from this side. This corner. Fold it a bit before flipping, or you can use tweezers. After flipping it to the front, this leaking opening, use this to fold the seam back, then use this to fix it. Then press the seams around it to prevent the white fabric from coming out. Push it a bit inside, then definitely do not let the white fabric show. This way, press a circle of visible stitches. Then finally, there is one here. A gray shoe ring needs to be placed. Then just put the Velcro on the back and it's done. This is just a piece of cloth. Just fold it back a bit, then wrap it again. You can make it into an unbound strap. Then the width of the long item is this is a 3-point tile broken into 0.5. Then if there's just a little left, you can adjust it slowly yourself. This is really easy to do. This is on the reverse side, and then only a few words remain. You can adjust it at your own pace. This is really easy to do. This is on the reverse side, and then only a few words remain. You can adjust it at your own pace. This is really easy to do. Leave it until it's just right. Then clamp it in here. This way it leaves no trace. Clamp it in like this, then use a needle like this. Sew them together. Then turn it over like this. There are no frayed edges. Sew it a few times like this. That's it. Then apply the Velcro next. This side is where the fuzzy side of the fabric is placed. Then make a mark here. This side is also the same length as that one. This is a tail for the buttock area, a spot that fits perfectly. You can try it on before you start. Locate the corresponding high point of the buttock area. Then place this mark down, or your fuzzy adhesive patch. Just place it directly below. Go all the way down. But what about this type? It's easier to wear when putting it on. You don't need to adjust this Velcro. As long as the bottom is sewn shut, you can just cover it like this on top. But if the Velcro goes all the way down, you have to find where it might misalign. The top and bottom are not aligned. This side has the fuzzy side. Because of this side of the plastic, when sewing it at the bottom, it won't stretch it. Be careful when doing it. Try to avoid stretching it as much as possible. If done in this order, the result will be better. Then stack it evenly. Do it this way. Then, like this below, I've stretched this a bit. It was pulled too hard during the making. You need to ensure they are aligned. Then, continue smoothly like this. Assemble together. How much goes over here? How much comes over from below? Then press down a line like this. Press it down to the top. Place a few pins here. Secure this Velcro strip. This is how it's done. If you can't locate this position, you should place it. After you place it, you should first draw a line. Make a mark like this. Then while sewing, line it up with this thread. Then press this line, then make a few basting stitches here. Loosen the basting stitches. If you don't need a needle here, it will tear apart. So like this. After the illness is healed, this type of pressure involves a few stitches. If it appears this way, it becomes strong. Then this strap is done. Next up is the sleeve. Sleeve. This is the sleeve's pattern paper. The sleeve fabric. The sleeve is made this way. I initially intended to break the rod, but later I thought it would be better to connect them. Then if it's elastic fabric, there's no need to add this kind of split button. Elastic fabric can stretch over the hand. If your fabric doesn't have elasticity, like this ordinary cotton fabric, you need to make it with this kind of opening. Then use elastic bands to make buttons. The teeth of the button. Then this is the button. This is the face of the sleeve. This is the face of the sleeve and metallic fabric. It is different. Then this is the cuff. It is the black part. First, create its lower sleeve, then complete it. According to this button position, mark its line on this stitch. Then start making its buttonhole. First, sew the buttonhole with a hand needle. Then secure it temporarily. Then use the sewing machine to sew it. Adjust the sesame mixture to be finer, to avoid the elastic band coming off when pulled. This seam is drawn on the line for the button position. Then leave the size of the buttonhole, just enough to let the button fit in. The reason for using the elastic band to make the buttonhole is because It's not easy to fray. And it has elasticity. That's acceptable. It's easier when pressing the buttons. This is how it is fastened. If it's fastened like this, it's easier to remember when organizing the buttons. Then just sew it. As long as the stitching is done well, it should not exceed the sewing area. The stitch is 0.5. When it's time to sew, it will be covered up. This is a reverse stitch, so it usually won't be short. You can do this at the end. Cut the thread. You can leave it uncut as well, as long as it's not pulled too tightly. After this stitch is completed, this is the front part. It is also the side facing the lining. This is also the front. This is the front part of the sleeve. Place it facing this way. Just clamp it here, here, and then this serves as proof. After flipping it over, it just happens to be a button sample. Then press another line like this. Then put this in the bag and clip it in the middle. After this is sewn, trim this a bit. This seam goes around this circle, then leave an opening. It is the wide side, not here at the cuff. The narrow side over there is the cuff. Because its lining is white. So press a clear line on the front, secure the lining in place, make sure it doesn't come out. This is how to properly press the clear line. Next, this button sample, this one, this shape is oriented inward because of this button mechanism. Isn't this opening big? So you can fasten the button. It becomes a bit easier. Then make the upper part of the sleeve. First, iron 2 lines of gathers on the top and bottom. After gathering, sew it together with the lining. This way, there are 2 lines on top and 2 lines on the bottom, used for gathering. The spacing is 0.5. Then add another line in the middle of the 0.5 spacing. The strength of the gathering, it's just the upper part of this repair. This upper part is oriented upwards. The bottom aligns with the bottom. Achieve the same intensity, then connect them together. This upper and lower angles should match in length. Then create a mark, because after you complete the folding, can't tell the difference between up and down. So you can create a mark. This is what's being connected. Then it's stitched together. Then it's stitched together. This way, the 2 on top. Then it's stitched together. This way, the 2 on top, the 2 at the bottom. You can make a mark. This connects to the top. The top part is narrow. Next is the wide part. When gathering the pleats, let me explain. Make a connection here. Then you pull this length. When it matches exactly, then make a connection on this side. Then fix it in place. After it is secured, adjust this fold. Then make them the same length. Just put the 2 of them like this, then join them together. The one below is the same as this one. I moved it down. It's just this section that connects. Because I always want to fold this, put it below. It's easier to handle. Oh, first, this is the stitching, the area above the stitching. Then after this is done, then stitch again, the area below this, the sleeve underneath. These 2 pieces are sealed together first. This buttonhole, there is a specific distance from it, so when sewing, be sure not to sew too close to the edge, just sew according to that button position. Then leave a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance for this. Wait a moment because it needs to be stitched together. 2 inner seams for the embroidery. Leave a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance on this side as well. Looking at it this way, this side, leave a 0.5, it's the same here. Then sew it together. After this is sewn, then put this inside. It's definitely inside. Then after it's sewn, after attaching this sleeve, then flip it over. This side is also clear. This is the sleeve, the top of the sleeve, the bottom of the sleeve. Then, to hold it in the middle, sew it again like this. Once this is done, after it's done, put it over here. This sleeve is almost done. Then sew it up here. The inside is different from the outside. Isn't it a bit shorter? You can put a line on it, press a line, then pull it, then sew it together. Otherwise, just put it underneath when using the sewing machine. These two need to secure it a bit to sew it together while sewing, while using scissors. Push it like this, it gets clamped on top. If it's really that good, then you just press one down. Keep pulling the thread. That way, its length will be shortened. Then with this inner section, it can be sewn together. Then place the two together, put them together, and press them down together. You just need to make them the same length, then sew the side seams together. Once it's sewn, can be used any function. You can lock the edges. This side seam. After sewing like this, it can be flipped over. Then sew buttons here. If it's tight at the chest, the kind with poor elasticity like swimwear, that kind, this single layer is sufficient. Then clip it on top. You don't need to think about this, the problem of sewing buttons, but typically you just think of it, then you just make one. A video that is a bit challenging to create, you use simple techniques, just think about it, and you'll be able to do it. So I made one. Tutorials like this, sewing buttons. After sewing the buttons, this is fine. When discussing sewing buttons, position it like this. Then following this, locate the right position. Sewing the button, the position of the button, like this. At the right time, it won't be misaligned. Then you just follow this marked point to sew the buttons. Oh right, there's one more thing. That is, when sewing the buttons, this button, when creating this button style, it is relative. You see, when we were nailing earlier, it's this side that was nailed. Then the other side is positioned relative to it. Do not align in the same direction. If possible, it will go smoothly. The buttons are all in the same position. Then it affects the outcome. This sleeve can be stitched together with the doctor's pattern here. Then use a hand needle, sew it on, just connect it together. I use black thread for this. If you use white thread, it won't look very obvious. And then this sleeve, when connecting it. That's it. Finished, by the way. There's one more thing about this sleeve. When wearing it, you need to pull it up. This is how to let it be. Pound it, make the top fold a little smaller, the bottom fold, then pound it a bit higher. Pound it,